Hi, here is the promised video of Ainm with some slurs and ornamentation in. We're going to start by looking at two different slurring patterns. The first is going to be as kind of a simple slurring where you're just slurring 2 or 4 notes together. So we're not actually going to start at the beginning of the tune. I'm going to assume that you've learnt the tune already, and we're going to start with the second phrase, which is that one there, the standard version of the second phrase. I'm going to slur the first 2 notes together, and then the B-A. And what I'd suggest is you practice that starting on a down bow, and also starting on an up bow. And that way, if you split the bowing, make a mistake, it doesn't feel like a mistake. You're used to doing it both ways and you have a bit more versatility. So whenever that phrase comes, be it the standard version or the fancy version, you're going to slur the first 2 notes and then the B-A, and that will be the same each time. So give that a go. When it comes to phrase 1 of the A music, the fancy version, I'm going to suggest we slur 4 semiquavers together, and then in pairs, and separate bows for the C sharp E, which will take you either to the very tip if you start on a down bow, or to the very heel if you start on an up bow. And again, the way I've done the bowing, the first time through the A music you'll start on a down bow, the second time through the A music you'll start on an up bow, and then the same is true in the B music. And I have done that on purpose. Sorry everybody, I've done that on purpose to make you try both ways. It's very easy to get set in one way of bowing something, and then if something happens, you make a mistake, you just feel like you have to stop. So versatility and adaptability is the name of the game here. Do it both ways, force yourself to do it, you'll thank me later. So we're just left with a couple more phrases, and this is where our second bowing pattern comes in. And this is a really, really useful bowing pattern. For those of you who are familiar with Stuart Hardy's teaching, he calls this the Ainm shuffle, and as far as I know that's just his name for it. But it's the idea that you're going to slur 3 notes here and then 2 separate. So you've got 3 separate bows, a 3-note slur, and then 2 separate. So that gives you the standard version of phrase 1. And there's 2 reasons that I've put that there. The first is that you need lots of bow for the first note because it's a longer note, and that can push you towards the tip. So then the slur pushes you back towards the heel and you don't run out of bow. And the second reason for that is that it slurs kind of across the 2 bars. So it kind of stops the tune from sounding too square. And with polkas, if you're not careful, they can end up a little bit kind of lumpy, and which I think for an Irish tune is kind of not what we're looking for. We're looking for something a bit smoother, a bit more flowing. So it stops the tune from sounding too square. That Ainm shuffle again is going to come back in the B section. In the first phrase, E, F sharp, E, and then in the second phrase, the same pattern again. So it's always 3 notes, either 3 equal notes or it's dotted here, but 3 notes, slur 3, and then you've either got a crotchet or 2 quavers at the end. So if we put that together reasonably slowly so you can follow my bowing. make sure you're starting either down bow or up bow and getting used to both of those. Some of the slurs are going to set up the ornaments, which I'll get onto in a moment. So I would pause the video now, try those out. The PDF has the slurs in, so if you need that to help you remember, absolutely use that and see how you get on. Okay, we'll have a look at some ornamentation next. And the first type of ornament that I'm going to use is something I would call a turn, which is where, going in between two notes, you would put the note above in. So instead of B, A, you get B, C sharp, B, A. And I would try that on a down bow and also on an up bow. So the movement itself is not so hard, but quite often people find getting it fast enough is the tricky thing. So my top tip there is, if you imagine that the spot where you put your C sharp down is hot, so as you put your finger down you kind of pull back as though you've just burnt yourself. So, and that way it's much easier to get the fast movement from pulling away than it is from trying to hammer down. So I'll do a few of those, and then we're going to do the same movement on the E string, but instead of F sharp, G sharp, there's no G sharp in our scale because we're pentatonic, so we're going to use the A instead, the third finger A. Just tap my finger down so that you can see. So, and then getting faster, and a bit faster again. So it's all done by pulling the fingers away rather than pushing them down quickly. And that ornament's going to come in our second phrase. And in the fancy version as well. So there's your first challenge, is to try putting those in. Try that, and we'll come back in a moment for the second one. Okay, our second ornament is going to be a slide up to a note. So in the B section, you have that top A, pulling the finger slightly below and sliding up. So it's just a slide up movement. Make it really small, otherwise you end up with a comedy. If that's what you're going for, then go for it, but I would keep it just really small, kind of not even a semitone, but like a quarter of a tone, and quite fast. So if I slow that down, I'm leaving the slide to just before I want the top A to land. You want the top of the note to be on the very first beat of the bar, so the slide is just before. Otherwise, gives you something slightly different, which you might use in other types of music. I'm not convinced it's particularly Irish. So you can slide up to that top A. Another place for it is in the second phrase, the fancy version and the standard version, the C sharp, just there. Again, very, very small movement. But that can be quite nice at speed, so that it just gives you a bit of variation. Make it quite subtle. I've kind of exaggerated that last time a little bit, just so that you can hear. So that would be the two places that you could maybe put a slide. You don't have to do it every time, these are just some suggestions for you. And the third type of ornament is kind of a cut. I think sometimes they get called a tap if you're coming from beneath. So I would do an E, F sharp, Again, down bow and up bow. And then same thing up the octave. So that you can play, for instance, in that second phrase, just to play an E before the F sharp is an option. And then the other place you might want to do that is the first phrase of the B section. Instead of, you could play. So those places, you know, some of them emphasise the note, sometimes they create flow between the notes, and that's something you can play with. I would say less is more. Practice all of them and then just pick out a few each time to vary what you're doing and to just have a bit of a play around and be creative. Put your little stamp of individuality on the tune by doing your own ornaments in those places.